Marvel Comics and Marvel characters may be the dominant characters and superheroes right now. But when I first started reading comic books, the biggest surprise to me, and what remains the biggest surprise to me, is just how rabid and ravenous DC fans are for their characters. I don't know if anybody loves anything more than DC fans love DC characters. And they didn't even have to be Batman, Superman, or Wonder Woman. DC fans love to the ground. They love to the core. There are fans of Sideways, okay? Sideways hasn't been in a comic book for 10 years.
No,
Where's he at?
he showed up in Absolute Power as a brief cameo. I'm keeping
All
track.
right,
I'm
damn,
keeping
ruined
track.
my
Yeah,
joke,
I'm
Tyler.
keeping track.
But but the point is, go ahead, Cale,
Proves the
sorry.
point. That proves the point. My man saw him in one panel and said, "That's him.
Oh,
That's
there
my
he
man.
is.
That's my guy."
I had to go in a League of Comic Geeks and Comic Vine to update his appearances. Yeah.
But that's the dedication and the fervor of a DC Comics fan. And honestly, I love it. So while, yeah, Marvel is technically bigger than DC, why is it that DC fans love so hard?
Because they don't leave the house. They got nothing else to do. No, I'm sorry. That's my Marvel fan coming out. um, yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one because I am a Marvel head through and through. On our Discord, you can customize your, not to plug our Discord, but I'm plugging it. You can customize your name to have a different color based on like the things you like. Like blue is for DC people, red is for Marvel, and I'm a Marvel guy. That's just who I am. But when I think about DC Comics and why people are so invested, the thing that jumps out to me most is that I think DC has always done a better job at collections, which makes it easier to access, I think, for fans. Um, I think of like characters like Spider-Man, and I think of characters like, um, geez, I guess Daredevil again was as a bad example. But I think when I think of DC stories, I can think of a lot more collections of DC than I can for Marvel. Marvel, I can think about runs, but DC, I can name Batman arcs. I can name Superman arcs. I can name you Marvel runs, but not really arcs. So I think from just like a being able to go to a store and pick up a DC book, it is easier to do that.
I think that DC, Marvel, I think, does a better job at making their characters more real in that you could pass Peter Parker in the street. But I think DC does a better job making their characters someone you want to follow. They make their characters better characters. There's legacy and there's iconicism behind their characters. You know, and I think that DC does a better job at building history with their characters because of their longevity. And I think when you get baked into any character at DC, you're in for a ride with that character's life story.
I I think I think it's one of those things where it's just harder to be a DC fan. Like it's so entrenched, right? And there's so many retcons and there's so many things that happen to these characters and it's hard to follow their history sometimes and Marvel's just so accessible and easy and who cares? It's a sliding time scale. Don't even worry or think about it. The fact that you have to think about it with DC, it forces that connection. It forces you to go a little deeper. If you're a fan of like The Flash and the
Yeah.
history of The Flash, you're a deep fucking DC Comics nerd. You probably know more about The Flash's history within DC than I know about all of DC.
This is how I'm
I do,
viewing
yeah.
viewing this in my head now. The way you described this, the Marvel DC fandom, it's cats versus dogs. Marvel's a dog.
Yeah.
Marvel is a thing that, oh, he's just wagging his tail, he's having fun. Just go ahead and play with him. He wants to play with you all the time. The movies are out. They're always at least okay. So
Mhm.
like it's just having fun. DC's a cat. You got to work for that affection. You got to do some research to figure out where that story is.
Interesting.
You might have to clean the litter a couple times too for a reboot, another refresh. But at the end of the day, it does care about you.
Interesting. This might be the difference between dogs and cat owners, but I see them the almost the exact opposite.
You have a dog, I have a cat, just for
That's
clarity's
right.
sake. Yeah.
uh, DC is more than happy to show up and give you the ball, the character. But in order to actually play with the ball, you're gonna have to teach them how to play with the ball, and you're gonna have to get into the work to make that happen with the character. And you got to take long 4-hour walks in a day to make sure that you get every single bit of exercise that you need to understand this character, and so that you and your dog and DC can communicate in the way that you're supposed to as a dog owner.
Dude, you ever hang around a cat owner and they've got all these fucking scars and scratches and shit? In my mind, that's what being a DC fan is like. You love hard when you love DC because you end up scarred up and scratched up, and because you go through the war, Heroes in Crisis, fucking 0 Hour,
I,
whatever,
I have
all
a
these different tragedies.
I have a scar on my ribs from my cat when I was holding when he jumped off, and I call that one identity crisis.
There you go.
Funny,
But
that's what my
yet,
dog's name is.
you stick with them. You stick with them. Like if you're a Nightwing fan, right? You
I
love the
am.
shit out of Nightwing.
I do.
But you knew for almost 20 years that the head honcho at DC Comics wanted your character's head. And you had to open every issue of Nightwing wondering if this was going to be the one where Dan Didio got his way.
And it
Uh,
almost was once.
and this is my cat Dan Didio, everyone.
It's hard out here for a DC fan, and that's why I love DC fans so much.
There's a
Because they really
tenaciousness.
know.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
tenaciousness. There's rolling with the punches. Keep it like DC fans are having a ball right now in 2025, March 2025, with All
History of
In
our Lord.
and Absolute. So like when it pays off, it pays off. But then you do have lows like the lows of the New 52 era. Marvel's
The,
kind of
the,
always just like we're good. DC is like peaks and valleys, where Marvel is always just kind of just like you get
I
occasional
mean,
peaks and valleys there, but
Blood Hunt Heroes Reborn.
I don't think it's fair to compare
Like,
Bloodhunt to Heroes Reborn.
I do.
don't you?
Bloodhunt was rough, bro. I don't know, man.
Although Heroes
Pepe
Reborn
Larraz
Red
aside.
Band would be pretty interesting.
Something to look at.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, I think from a quality standpoint, I can't really tell you that Marvel has been way better than DC since I started reading comics. Like, I think Marvel was better than DC like the last few years up until sort of now. Because DC was in the doldrums. But in the 2010s, I don't know, man. I don't know.
And I feel like Marvel also tends to focus on individual sections of their universe more than others for certain periods. I think of
Hmm.
Hickman's time on Avengers, that they were Avengers heavy because there were movies coming out at the time. The Krakoan Age, they really focused on the X-Men at that time. And some would argue everything else fell by the wayside. And then maybe X-Men did at the end too. Or even like, Marvel Knights when they were focusing on that, and then eventually Avengers came with Disassembled and then the Bendis era. So I in my mind, I always picture Marvel as a whole bunch of different eras for different sections of the universe that are like, oh, this is great. Everything else is kind of okay, but this is great. Then there's Daredevil, that's just always consistently pretty good. But DC, Like Batman, it fluctuates. Batman's not Daredevil in a way. So it is a little tricky being a DC fan because sometimes you'll get, a Snyder run. And then sometimes you'll get, like, no offense to Chip, but maybe a Chip run that's a little kind of all over the place.
You can say that, but if we're comparing, if we're taking Batman, right, and we can compare him to Spider-Man, I don't think it's a dissimilar situation.
No, yeah, good point there, yeah. Although I'm still waiting to
But
see what DC's Paul will be.
Sorry. Oh no, he's the guy that got
It's true, yeah.
Superman, right? Yeah, were you gonna say, Kale?
I was going to say I would have compared just in my experience. I think I would have compared Daredevil to the Flash.
I was gonna say, who is there a DC's Daredevil? So you say Flash.
I think that's a more consistent answer in my head. I think there have been a lot of really good, solid, long Flash runs that have all done something interesting for the character.
Can we do the last 20 years? Jeff Johns, right?
Mark
Or is
Waid would
Yeah,
that
still be in
sure.
20, wouldn't
We
he?
might go that. Geez, at this point, that might be further back. I
oh.
my hesitance there was I don't know if I could do the last 20 years actually.
20 years would have been
Uh, so
2005.
we've
Okay.
got Spurrier's on now,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and like it or not, he is doing something interesting. Um, Jeremy Adams, I've heard good things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Williamson spent a long time
I like
on
that
the
run.
Flash. Yeah,
Yeah.
Williams. He spent a long time on the Flash, and then made it a point to sort of bring the Flash back into the cultural conversation. Um, After sort of languishing in the New 52, whereas even in the New 52, the Flash was a really strong title. You know,
Banana Pool.
Yeah.
Bucoletto and Manipul easily one of the best things to come out of the New 52. There was a small languishing period there, I think, between Williamson and Bucoletto Manipul. I'm not positive who was on it, but then
That's the
you
Diggle
go
era for
back.
Flash.
Is that real?
No, I mean like in terms of
Or in
quality.
the Daredevil
Yeah, in the
comparison? Yeah.
Daredevil comparison. Yeah.
But even before that, you've got uh uh Bart Allen, Impulse becoming the Flash, and that's, mixed. But before that, you've got Wally West and, his entire era. And that's when you get into Johns and then Wade and then
Yeah.
Morrison. And then, you know, so to me, I think the Flash is more popular than Daredevil in like audience, sort of knowledge. And that may be changing, but I think they're comparable.
I mean, the Flash is like he's OG.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
when I think of iconic superheroes, old school, I think of all DC.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the Super Friends, and I mean the Flash had a TV show. The Flash is OG major character.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Flash is a good one. The only one I would say maybe even more so, and I can't believe I'm going to be the guy to say this, is Swamp Thing.
I I also wondered that.
Because when I think of DC's, I mean, this is a whole different topic entirely at this point, but who cares? When I think of like Daredevil, I think that's the best work that those creators pretty much did at that company, usually.
Yeah.
Like as a team, usually. Maybe you can dispute Brubaker and his cap, but Swamp Thing's pretty much up there. It's not as consistent as the Flash in terms of publishing, but every Swamp Thing run is pretty damn good.
That's what holds me back from that.
Sure. Yeah.
I think.
I think that's the problem. It's impressive with Daredevil because they've published him straight through.
Hasn't stopped.
And it's
Yeah.
all been hot. Swamp Thing just doesn't have the cachet to stay in publication, but every time they do it, it's because someone's got a great idea. And so of course they knock it out the park. I also think when it comes to DC, in some ways I feel like they're not afraid of themselves. Like I hate the going back and cleaning up the crazy multiverse stuff, but they go there. Like
Yeah.
they're willing to go there and tell those stories and dig in and well, what's over here? What's in this closet? What can we dig out? What can we do? I like that because it means that you don't necessarily know where DC is going to go next and what we can expect. Whereas with Marvel, and again, this isn't even a criticism because I love Marvel, but sometimes it does feel safe. And sometimes it can be too safe, but I would not really say that DC tends to feel safe. And sometimes that can be a bad thing, but it does produce great comics at times.
They're more likely to break that glass in case of emergency, where
Yeah.
Marvel never does it.
Or not even in case of emergency, just to do it. Just to do it. Like, so a listener will have to say this because none of us were alive, but like, was it a risk at all, or was it safe to do the Dark Knight Returns with
Mm,
Batman, given what Batman was
sure.
like prior to that? It's not the same presentation. I think I've heard that in the immediate beforehand, Batman was kind of encroaching upon a little bit darker storytelling, but for the
Yeah.
most part, you're talking about a time when Batman was, I mean, Joker was running around with fucking fish, right? So was that risky?
It would have been more like Batman was a bit more like James Bond at the time
Yeah,
than
Right,
yeah.
Batman.
And the
right.
movies
Yeah.
eventually shifted that same direction. I think
After the
after
fact.
the fact, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there was probably, yeah, I can see that. I mean, comic books were shifting in that direction too. So I think it would only be fair that we would see it in something like Batman, just based on the writers they had at the time.
And the fact that they did that with their biggest IP at a time where, Tyler's definitely right. We were seeing a shift, but you would imagine that they would be safest with Batman. Today, in today's comics, we don't
Mm.
think of Batman as a character to take a risk with. We think of that run as like, okay, that's going to be something safe. It'll be good. It'll be whatever it'll be. But back then they were like, no, we're going to take this chance. And I love DC for that.
In the closest you can say in terms of Marvel doing that was a year later with Born Again, and even then Daredevil wasn't. It's not their Batman, you know. So it's not that big of a risk. Sure, they did it in main continuity, where they really shifted what that could be. But yeah, I think it is. It is at least in my eyes, it seems like a risk to make Dark Knight for sure, and one that paid off. Not everything pays off there, but
That's true. But you know what? Marvel's Spider-Man doesn't have a red sun. There is no red sun story for Spider-Man. I think like whether you like red sun or not, I think the fact that DC allowed them to do that is interesting.
that's another benefit of DC though is the amount of Elseworld stuff they have. Marvel doesn't really do that. It probably more in recent times they've done like these one and done stories or Marvel Zombies did well for them. So they're okay with dipping into the multiverse now or what they call the multiverse to do these stories outside of time. DC's been doing that for a while.
DC said, "Oh, zombies. That's cute. I've got four cartoon universes where Bugs Bunny is Superman. I'll go to my multiverse."
I have an Elseworlds issue of Superman meets Metropolis, the
Yeah.
Fritz Lang movie.
Yep.
That's how okay they were with doing Elseworld stuff. So I can
Yep.
see that just being a lot more fun too as a comic book reader.
Is it fair to say that DC is historically more willing to explore the depths of its characters? Everybody talks about the realism and relatability of Marvel's characters. Does that come at a kind of a cost where DC is willing to burn their characters down to see what's there and then reconstruct them?
I think they can do that with Elseworlds, and they have. I think that definitely helps them because they have a lane to do that in that fans can accept and enjoy, but it's at no risk to the main story.
Honey, you need to read some DC. We need to get you some DC books.
What I mean,
There
like,
are
Because he,
there
sure,
are
like Aquaman.
so many DC books that are exactly that.
It, how are you reading this? Like, what do you mean depths? Like, are you talking about just like good
Like,
character studies, or like, hey, let's just destroy the character, let's destroy Aquaman. Now he's a guy with a hook and a beard.
yeah, both.
Sure.
like, Identity Crisis, hyper controversial, right?
Mm.
Marvel doesn't, like, just for a second, put aside what you think about the story, right? Marvel doesn't have that.
A dissection of no, I'm agreeing with you, Sean. So I'm not disagreeing with you here, but like a
Okay.
dissection of like what heroes are and they do something bad. I mean, it's kind of what like Morrison's JLA did too, but no, not really. At least not around that time for sure.
Yeah, that's not even a fully formed thought. It's just the idea that in my mind, DC is willing to take their characters there and just see what happens.
Here's the other thing, and I think only Marvel has been doing this better in recent times too. DC has a much better foothold in animation. And I think that builds fans from a young age where they stick with it with DC a lot more. I think maybe we have this discussion, 10 years from now, that might change because Marvel Animations, they're doing a lot of young ages animation currently, like with Spider-Man and stuff. BJ comes on the show and he talks about Miles Morales and Spider-Man now. But like when I grew up, Batman the Animated Series, Justice League, Static, that continued with Teen Titans for another generation. Another generation got Young Justice. Another generation got Teen Titans Go. There's always been that foothold in non-comics media that can bridge people's fandom to extend to the comics.
But the one that's always been successful at Marvel is their biggest character, Spider-Man,
Yeah, which is probably why he's
who's
the biggest character. Yeah,
who is basically had a presence on screen since the 60s in
Mhm.
some form or another.
Mhm. Look, honestly, if we don't end this conversation, we are never beating the allegations that this is the DC podcast. But clearly, there's a lot to love about what DC does, and I like how much it connects with the people that it's for. But I would say that, when it comes to mass appeal, Marvel's got that. But when it comes to the depth, DC probably does have that. And that hurts my Marvel fanboy heart to say. I kind of think it's true.
I think the mass appeal that Marvel has does not make a as dedicated a comics fandom as DC does.
At the very least.
Sure, yeah.
Why do you love, sorry, why do you love DC so much? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear from you. Sorry to anybody who's a Marvel fanboy. We did your video. You guys can go watch that one. This is the DC time. It's okay. We'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, take care.